Okay, we're live in the Chayenu. The Daily Tanya, if you have the Chayenu booklet, that would be on page 68. Today is the 18th of the Hebrew month of Menachem Av, as well as August 12th, Tuesday. And we're concluding the Epistle 5, the communal letter, the fifth one in this section of the Tanya. Again, it was a letter, it was a fundraising appeal letter to raise money for the Jews of Israel from the Russian diaspora Hasidic Brotherhood, who again were themselves not very wealthy. And the Alter Rebbe said, despite all that, we have to give beyond till it hurts and beyond. And in order to encourage, he gives them a mystical treatise of what charity does, the inner workings of it. And then when you know the inner workings, you're like, okay, despite the hardship, a person wants to do it. Right? If you don't know really what charity is, okay, I gave it the office. But if you know what it's doing is so incredible, you're like, okay, I'll push and push and push myself. So the recap was he talked a lot about to understand why charity is so important. So he said originally he quoted a verse about King David, that King David made a name for himself. King David made a name for himself. He didn't really explain what that meant. He says that the Zohar on that, the Kabbalah says that he made a name means, it says that someone who, that verse about David also someone who makes God's name. Not David made a name, he made God's name. And he made God's name through acts of charity. Okay, how does making God, what does it mean to make God's name with charity? So what does it mean to make God's name? So he had through a whole treatise about God's name, the different letters of the four-letter name of God, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And he quoted a Talmudic teaching that says that with the letter Yud, God created the spiritual worlds. With the letter Hey, God made the physical world, physical universe. So, 1 second. Fine. Okay. So, why is the physical world made through the letter Hey? Because Hey is breath. Hey is a breath letter. And that is kind of hinting to the whole creation spheros mechanism. The God created the world through the mechanism of speech. God spoke the world into being, which is, of course, metaphor. And the metaphor is speech is really about bringing speech is a few things, but in the creation, there's wedged or laced inside of it very deep subconscious will, right? When I say a word, there's, first of all, that word is both physical, it's made of breath, and it's also a vessel for the metaphysical, the concept in the word or the sentence. So that's really why speech is a metaphor of God, for God creating the world. He's creating a physical, other parameters type world. But in that parameters physical world, there's a lot of intent, a lot of spiritual will or divine will enclosed there. So that's why speech is a good, speech is a very good, mashal, a parable. However, we yesterday said that in order to not just have creation, but to bring the inner subconscious will that is, intrinsic but hidden inside the speech, we need chesed. You need kindness, because kindness is ultimately about taking something very precious and giving it away undeservedly. And the Alter Rebbe yesterday said that even if you're a big Torah scholar, which means, so again, this is really, there's a I don't call it an agenda, but there's a bottom line here. Give money to charity. He's trying to convince them to give charity. So one, he says, a tzedakah charity is kind of mirrors God's kindness, which is really, you know, what the whole idea of the kindness was, of the charity was, of the speech was, of creation is. It's all kindness. So you give charity, you're mirroring God's will. You're mirroring God's, modus operandi. But let's say you're a Torah scholar. So, A, you're probably very poor. Number two, you are doing another way of bringing God into the world by speaking words of Torah, learning it. You're manifesting God's wisdom and and bringing a very corporeal way through speaking God's wisdom, which is why it says whoever reads Torah, it's as if they're calling God towards them, because you're bringing God in your speech. So you're doing. Some people do it through charity, and some people do it through Torah. He says, no, even if you do it through Torah, you have to also do charity. Why? Because manifesting the Shekhinah, God, through Torah has a potential barrier. And that is, it could be very intellectual, it could be in that realm. But are you manifesting it down to the very, meat and potatoes of the physical world, to the very physicalized? So Torah has that that handicap, so to speak. When you couple the Torah with giving charity, it becomes a booster for that Torah that you manifested through the speech and the wisdom in your brain and your speech. You're corporealizing, you're concretizing it into chesed, which is very downward, very down, down, down. So that's what you got to give. So this today, that was just a summary of how we got here. On Tuesday, it says, to summarize, this explains, he's ending the letter today. He says, parenthetically, this explains why the Arizal of blessed memory, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the greatest teacher of Kabbalah, he said there's two types of souls of Jews. There are souls of Torah scholars and souls of people who are involved in acts of charity and kindness, right? So what does that mean? It's very weird because there's 613 mitzvahs that apply to everybody. So like you say, some just do Torah and some just do charity. So he explains, based on what he said, it's not either or. It's about stressing. What's your main life stress? What? No, we'll get to separate them. But what's your primary focus? Some people are meant to study Torah primarily. They also have to give charity, and vice versa. Someone who does, makes money and lives a life of kindness and tzedakah, they also got to learn Torah. It's not either or. It's primary. He meant. But what we said yesterday, that you need, it's not just like, oh, I do Torah primarily and I also give a couple pennies to tzedakah. Your Torah needs your charity. It's not like to be a well-rounded, a Jew. I got to do a little charity and a lot of Torah, or a little charity and a lot of Torah. You got to do it. You got to do the Torah itself needs your acts of charity, which is probably novel, because I don't think in that era, this is in the late 1700s, early 1800s, I don't think that people that were lifelong students of Torah had a lot of money or their focus was charity. There was other people that went to work and had business, and he's saying it's vital for the Torah study alone to be coupled with a certain amount of real charitable giving, because the charity enables your Torah to flow down and permeate your physical existence. As we said yesterday. Now, what's interesting is because to go from God's wisdom to the world of the mind, it's a descent, but it does not compare to the descent of bringing God's wisdom and will into the very physical, autonomous type of world. That's a much bigger feat. And he ends off with an interesting concept, which is he doesn't elucidate on it. Another parenthetical. This gets back to what we said earlier that does that whoever gives charity is making God's holy name. So we explained a little bit about God's holy name, meaning really manifesting God's name all the way down into the world. But it says making. The word of the Zohar was making. Could have said one is finishing, or the other verbs for occupied with God's name. Now you're making. Why making? Because making is a hint to the lowest world of the cosmos, called the world of action, the physical world. So you're physicalizing in the world of action God's name. You're manifesting God's Shekhinah, which is the name, into the physical realm. And that is, of course, done through charity, because other mitzvahs have their own specialty of what they do to manifest God's name. But charity brings it down into the physical. It brings all your emotions and thoughts about God and the Torah you learn into the physical. And he says something very, very short at the end, analogously speaking, not to, by way of differentiating us and God, that a human being only speaks to others, but not when he's alone. Right? When you're by yourself, the medium of communication is thought. But when you have others, you're trying to get it out to another realm, to a further out realm from you, right? Then you have to speak. So, and when you speak to them, you are really contracting your thought. When you have an emotion or an idea, it's much more rich and vibrant and bigger inside of you. When you convey it to someone else, you can only give a glimmer of that. You have to do a tzimtzum. Okay? So, and he finished off, the intelligent will understand. I just want to, the Rebbe, Rebbe's glosses, our Rebbe, on the Tanya, and he says it's unclear what he's, the scholars of Kabbalah will understand. Understand what? The Rebbe said maybe he's referring to the last very short analogy of comparing what we talked about of charity bringing God's presence to the lowest realm, the world, comparing to the concept of a name. In Chassidus, it talks a lot about a name. Your name is not you. A name is really something is about you, how you're referenced by others. Similar to the idea of bringing the God into the other, to the outside, the outside world, right? Is it's very similar concept. It's about to bring the God's presence into the lowest. Okay. Chumash.